New Year's Eve has always been a fun time for me, especially to watch the beautiful fireworks at midnight. But it was only one event that changed my perspective of and also scared me during one event of the particular New Year's Eve. It happened in 2015. My best friend Jacob had invited me to his apartment for a New Year's party, and I took my boyfriend Tyler with me, and we actually had a good time. We interacted a lot with Jacob and some other guests. But at some point during the party, I believe it was around 10 p.m., me and Tyler, we were separated during the party, and a guy walked up to me and he said his name was Cameron, and we had a pretty good conversation. He mentioned that he's a friend of Jacob from work, and he was seems to be a quite amazing, good-looking guy, even though I'm overtaken. And we had at least a decent conversation. We talked about some common interest and what we thought about what's going to happen in the next new year of 2016 and all other stuff. And at some point, I actually left Cameron alone to talk with Jacob for a little bit. And I did mention about this guy named Cameron, and Jacob could actually confirm that actually he is a co-worker of him. And I left it by that. We actually had a good time. And then at midnight, just at the stroke of midnight, when the fireworks was going off in a distance from the apartment, Jacob was well distracted himself by watching some other friends. When suddenly Cameron walked up to me and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I was really stunned by it. And then he smiled and asked if I would like to go out with him. But I told him that I already had a boyfriend and he was at the party too. But he didn't believe me. And he said he hasn't even seen me with my boyfriend at the party at any time. And I tried to, then he asked me again if I would like to go out with him. But I said no, and he seemed to be get angry about it. And as I tried to walk away, he grabbed my arm and said, "You should give me a chance. I'm a nice guy." But I tell him I am not interested in him and tries to leave, but he wouldn't even let me even go. Tyler, who was standing across the room talking to someone, heard me yelling and walks up to Cameron and tells him to leave me alone and that I am actually his girlfriend. When Cameron claimed that I was his girlfriend when we were just having this argue. But Tyler said that he should leave me alone. And Cameron didn't believe that he was my boyfriend and tried to argue. And again, Jacob walked up to him to stop the fight. But Cameron then yells at me, tells that I led him on, which I didn't do. Tyler and Jacob had enough and tells Cameron to leave, which at first he refused, but then he does it anyway. I had never seen the guy ever since, especially when I often goes to Jacob's job to talk to him sometimes, and it turns out that even that at some point after New Year's Eve, that Jacob told me that Cameron left the job. So I was at least pleased that I not had been worried to run into Cameron if I went to Jacob's job or if I would see him at any party. But even so, I really doubt Jacob would have invited Cameron over to another party if I was invited due to what happened during at the New Year's Eve party at 2015. So Cameron, please let us never meet ever again. Celebrating New Year's Eve is always a fun, especially when it involves family or friends to watch the fireworks together and welcome the New Year's that is just around the corner. there was one particular year of New Year's Eve that was not at first was actually fun, but almost ended up very disturbing to me. It actually happened back in 2018. By the way, my name is Alice, and I was 22 years old at the time. I didn't even have any plans for that particular New Year's Eve, and my best friend Helen had decided that she was going out to the local bar and to celebrate the New Year's Eve and asked if I would join her. And since I didn't have any other plans and she was my best friend and so I thought why not? So we went to the bar and we actually have a lot of good time. We talked to some other people, wished them happy New Year's and even played some pool, enjoyed some drinks. But at some point during the night, I was sitting by myself by the bar when this guy walked up to me and asked if he could buy me a drink. And it's like a drink wouldn't hurt. So he orders two beers and he sat down next to me and we started to have a good, decent conversation. We talked about what we had done through this year and what we hoping that was going to happen the next year and what our dreams were. And it was actually really, very much have a good time. But during conversation, he asked me if I was interested to go out with him. But he was quite handsome, but I told him that I was flattered, but I wasn't really much interested to in him, and then I told him have a good evening, and I left the bar to go find Helen. Turns out she was playing pool with a guy by the name Andrew. She had actually a good time, and I was talking to him and my best friend, and at some point I was getting more. I wanted to have another beer, and Helen asked if I could buy her also a beer. So why not? I went to buy me and her a beer, and this guy, which I will know remember as Brian, was still at the bar, asked me again if I would like to go out with him. But I started to feel a bit creeped out, and I said no, and that I wasn't much interested in him. He seems to get a little bit upset and tells that I'm like every single other women that doesn't give him a chance because they're he thinks that I'm stupid as the others, and he's screaming at my face, and that everyone else at the bar is looking at him, and the bartender just told him, "Calm down, or you have to leave the bar." Brian didn't even listen to this guy, and I was really trying to walk away, but he grabbed my arm and he said, "You're leaving with me," and he was almost dragging me out of the bar in front of the whole crowd. And even if I would try to do something, but he was way stronger than me. I think he was like 6'2", and I was only 5'4". And and as he was near the door, I heard a voice, and it's what's turned out it was Andrew, the same guy who had been playing pool with Helen, telling Brian to let me go, that I wasn't even interested in him, but Brian took this a challenge to fight Andrew. And I didn't even know at the time, or didn't even Brian, that Andrew was a black belt in judo, a martial art, and he managed to prevent Brian to do any particular harm to me or anyone else, or particularly himself, until the bouncer came and threw Brian out, and they told him that he's banned from this particular bar for life. After that, I was very shook up. I was scared. And can anyone blame me what just had happened? I had heard some stories like this could happen, but I never, even in my life, ever thought it's gonna could happen to me. But after that, I calmed down enough and I spent the rest of the evening to watch to celebrate the New Year's Eve with Helen and Andrew, which I very much thanked for saving me, and even afterwards he actually gave me his number, and eventually we started dating, and even to this day we're still together. I was really surprised at how this even happened. I mean, the night started, me and my best friend were just having a good time at the bar, and this decent guy was trying to flirt with me, even despite telling him no twice, and then he couldn't take a no for an answer, and almost dragged me out until this amazing guy Andrew stopped him, and now me and Andrew are being together ever since. And in a way, Brian, you were actually lucky to have been prevented not being doing any serious harm. But let's for the both of our sakes, let us never meet again. I had the most disturbing New Year's Eve party at 2010. I had always enjoyed the New Year's Eve with my family or friends. But this particular year at 2010, my best friend Sarah was decided to throw a small New Year's Eve party at her house with her boyfriend, and she thought it was maybe a good time to me to be invited since I had just recently left a relationship that was for about 2 years, and I was like, at first, I didn't want to even want to go. I wanted to be preferred to be left alone, but Sarah convinced me to just be at the party, and I was like, okay, why not? But the part itself was not really much disturbing. I actually had a good time. I mean, she and her boyfriend Luke had actually cooked all of some food, even had brought some snacks like chips, popcorn, and all kinds of things. And a lot of good drinks beer, cider, champagne, or what will you know it. But at the party, I actually had a good time to talking with Sarah and Luke, and but at some point during the party, I was just by myself, and this guy walked up to me, and he said his name was Marco, and that he was looking at already being had enough to drink already. That he was, I believe, he was almost completely wasted or something. And he tried to hit on me, but I refused any of his advances and just ignored him. But that seems to be anger him because he saw me just walking away, and later he found me talking to Luke, and we were both laughing, and he just walked up to us and punched Luke right in the face with his knuckles, and he slapped me so hard in the face I almost fell to the floor, and he screamed at me how can I can be interested in another guy and not giving him a chance because he was quite handsome. His words, not mine. I was still shocked, and I tried to explain that Luke was my best friend's boyfriend, and I wasn't even interested in him at all. We were just laughing with it because we were talking about a movie. But Marco, he didn't even believe me at all. And he refused to believe me and slapped me again, but this time harder, and it put me on the floor. This time, Luke Mantis stood up, and he stood in front of Marco and tried to make him to leave the house. But Marco said he is allowed to stay because he is a friend of the owner, Sarah. But Sarah, who had seen this happening, walked up to us and told him to leave. But she didn't want to ever see his quote unquote stupid face ever again. Especially how she tried to hit her boyfriend and her best friend, me. But Margot then pulled out a pocket knife, threatened to attack anyone, including Sarah. But he managed to slash her left arm, and stabbed Luke in the chest. But some of the guests who actually was stunned to seeing this happening grabbed him, hold him down until the police was called and they came arrested him. Turns out he was not only drunk, but he was also high on meth. I was like, this was supposed to be a good time to celebrate with New Year's Eve with my best friend, and her boyfriend, and try to even interact with some new other people. But having this guy to almost ruin the evening, not only for me but everyone else. And especially as my best friend though got a slash with a knife on her left arm, she would have to be in stitches. And even Luke. But luckily though that the stab wound was even that quite severe, but only a few inches in, and that still he needed a couple of stitches himself. I was really terrified. I didn't want to leave the house because I was afraid if I would somehow run into him on the streets. But later I was told that Marco had to got some time in jail because due to the fact he attacked Sarah and Marco and for murder, attempted murder, and were I don't know, and being in possession of certain drugs like meth. I was stunned, but I was scared for some time. But eventually, I moved on, and I actually did find a new boyfriend just a few months later after this New Year's Eve party, and I'm actually still happy to be with this guy. And I was just I had told him what had happened at particular New Year's Eve party, and he said if he ended up being there, he would defend me against this Marco guy. But as I heard, Marco is still at the jail for at least for another number of years. And Marco, even though we were never unlikely to ever meet again, but if we do, please let us never ever meet ever again. Thank you. Because you scared me a lot. So that once again, let us never meet.